Therwan Saranai. How are you all doing? Looking forward to another talk? Why are you looking forward? Don't you feel like we live in a very it's a very fortunate time to be alive, I think. I often think to myself, if my mother was born 10 years later, I would probably not be here right now, but she would have had this opportunity. She'd be in the audience right now. If my grandmother had come a little later into the world, she'd probably have had the opportunity to listen to the Dhamma. Yes, they would have listened to the Dhamma, but unfortunately I don't think they had enough merits to come across this teaching that we are able to share with each other today. I know they would have gone to the temple, and I'm sure she did. Do what all good Buddhists are supposed to do. Go to the temple once a month, offer flowers, light the incense sticks and oil lamps, the customs, the rituals. But hey, maybe that's what I was doing in my previous lives. Accumulating merits so that one day I would have this opportunity. Maybe that's what we were all doing. Honestly, today when I see an elderly person, maybe say someone who's too old to even come along to a sermon, I can't stop myself from feel empathy towards them, because I know what they have missed. I think the more I begin to appreciate the value of the Dhamma and how transformative this Dhamma is and how it can change someone's life completely, turn it upside down, inside out, whatever you want to call it. And then I see people, sometimes on the way out from Rajagiriya, I see people just walking up and down the street. How close they are and yet how far they are. And then there are people here who come from quite far away from Rajagiriya, but then there are people who live in Rajagiriya, maybe next door neighbors. I'm not sure whether they actually come here. How close they are, yet how far they are. It's incredible, isn't it? Really is. Bizarre. I try to sometimes and make sense of this, and then I realize that's not for me to understand. It's just how the world is. I know I can't heal everyone, not even the Buddha could, so I'm not going to be able to do that myself. But I should have that intention, just as the Bodhisattva did. The Bodhisattva's intention was, I'm going to heal everyone. I'm going to save myself and then save everyone else, every sentient being. That's what he had. That's how big his ambition was. Very ambitious. I should try to think like that. That I want to save everyone. But I know I will not succeed. I will only be able to maybe take with me one drop of water from the great ocean. The great ocean of suffering, just one drop of water. And perhaps you're all in that drop of water, just one drop. Maybe there are a few more to come, maybe. I sometimes ask myself, what is my purpose? Saving myself, yes, I understand that. I have to do that. That is my priority. Because if I didn't do that for myself, I would not be able to do that for you. How many of you? That is a question I really struggle to find an answer to. How many of you? When we started, I don't know, how many did we have when we started? Anyone remember that? How many were we when we started? About 30 or so? Today? What's the head count today? On some days we have 250 plus. So we started with 30. How many more? I don't know. First timers today? Any first timers? You're not first timers, you've met each other before. First timers? Alright, welcome. Thank you. How many more? I'd love to have everyone in the world here right now. This place isn't big enough, is it? That's the problem. If I could preach right now and everyone could hear me, they don't all have to be here. They don't all have to be here. If I could just preach and just speak and everyone could hear me. If there was one boon I would ask for, say there was a Sakradeva or someone, or the wizard and the magic lamp. You rub the lamp and out comes the genie. What one wish would you like? And I say the one wish I'd want is for me to be able to speak from my seat and for everyone to be able to hear me and understand me. And I'll speak one language, but everyone should be able to understand it in their own mother tongue. That would be my only ask. So by extension of that, I understand that you, I, all of us, we are so extremely fortunate. It is not because of me, I have to add, it is because of what we are here for. We have come here with a shared purpose, haven't we? You know that you're not here just to meet me. You know that, right? You know you're not here to meet me. You're here to meet what I have to say. That's why you're here. It's not to see this pretty face, is it? Then you'd be very disappointed. You're here to hear what I have to say. Because that is what liberates you. It's not me as a person. I'm just flesh and bones, just like everybody else. But this message that when we get together, we somehow discover. I never come with an agenda. I don't know what I'm going to talk to you about today. Still, I don't know. We'll just have to see how it unfolds. That is because I am so confident about our merit power, our collective merit power, that when we come together, if you come here with your merits, I come here with my merits, and having practiced the Dhamma as my teacher has asked me to, when these two heads meet, or when all 250 of us meet in one place under one roof, then miracles begin to happen. That is how all these sermons have happened. Each and every one of them. You know, when we had the COVID, and we were at the monastery, and no one would visit us. Well, we didn't let anyone visit us. I'm sure people would have wanted to, but we couldn't. Those days I used to have to do those sermons, the first series of talks. They were titled Buddha's Guide to Happiness. I had to sit in front of camera, so it was just the camera and me and no one else. There were, I think, around 30 odd sermons that were done that way. Before that, I used to do sermons, and when I first started, they were done on Skype. I was talking to a laptop, but at least I knew that there was someone on the other side listening to it. So how did I survive, you might wonder? Just talking to a camera and no one else there. You know what I used to do? Those of you who are used to know back then, there are a few of you who are used to know back then, even when we had the COVID period, I used to have a mental image of your faces in the audience. And then I used to preach. So before I started my sermon, I would imagine that you were in the audience. I distinctly remember that to this day. I would imagine you were in the audience. I can remember some of your faces. So then I have some ladies on this side, the gents on this side, or whatever. And then I'd talk to them. All the while I would be looking at the camera. If I couldn't do that, the sermon would not be a success. There were days where I had to do the whole sermon again. Sometimes, maybe 2 hours into a sermon, 1.5 hours, because I used to do the Sinhala sermons back then as well, during the COVID period. Those sermons would sometimes go for 2-3 hours, and at the end of that, I'd tell myself, no, that was a complete flop. Let's try again. Imagine doing one of these sermons again and still having no one in the audience. So there were days like that. So I think this is what makes this happen. Us all coming together, all of us coming together. This is a joint venture. You play more than a little part, much more than a little part, just by being here and also by bringing with you the merit power that you have, by bringing with you a compassionate heart, by bringing with you a sense of compassion and loving kindness. It is you that makes this happen. So we're all very lucky, we're all very fortunate to actually be able to listen to the Buddha's teaching, because it is that teaching that liberates us. Once again, it is not you meeting me that does anything for you. It's you meeting what I have to say. By what I have to say, I mean what the Buddha said. These are the Buddha's words. How does one know that these are the Buddha's words? The Buddha says, if when you listen to a talk, a teaching, as a result of that, you experience the extinguishing of raga, dvesha and moha. The fires of raga, the fire of dvesha and the fire of moha. If you experience that those fires are being extinguished, then that has to be my teaching, because there is no other teaching that would do that. This is a quote from the Buddha himself. So if you have experienced some of that at least, then that is because in here, under this roof, as a family, we have come together, and that is what we have been talking, the Buddha's teaching. How lucky we are that we have come across the Buddha Sasana. I know it better than all of you, because I have experienced what the Buddha Sasana can do, how it can change a life from what it used to be to what it is now. See, I'm a very different man. If you'd met me 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, you'd have thought that I was a different human being altogether. The Buddha Sasana did this to me. Today I'm in robes. Those days I was in a pair of trousers and a shirt. This came with understanding, realization, understanding the truth. And I'm not a stupid person. I'm not an idiot. I can make sense of things. I can put 2 and 2 together and add them up to 5, 4. So the fact that the Buddha's teaching made sense to me is enough evidence to me, myself, that it is nothing but the truth. That is my vote of confidence. It made sense to me. That is not me boasting about myself, that is me boasting about the Buddha's teaching. It's delightful. It's wonderful. It's amazing. It's marvelous. It's beautiful. Right. Let's make some of that beauty happen in your hearts today then, shall we? Right, let's bring our palms together. In veneration of the great teacher, our great master, our guide, let us also remind ourselves that as we bring our palms together in veneration, this is also a pledge of allegiance to commit ourselves to fulfill the truth, to walk the path, and to engage in the practice that takes us to ultimate wisdom, ultimate liberation, and to ultimate happiness. May this veneration be to the perfect one, the supremely enlightened one, the Supreme Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Let's see if we can carry on from where we left off last week. Quickly we'll revisit what we talked about, and I only explained to you the problem but not the solution last week, so that's not very helpful, is it? So last week we talked about the purpose of having a consciousness. Right, so we're going to get into the depths of the Dhamma right from the start today. Is that okay? All right. So brace yourselves. We started off this conversation by reminding ourselves that nothing would exist in this world if we didn't have a purpose. I think I took a pen, for instance, as an example. The fact that there is a pen in this room speaks volumes to you that the necessity to write on a whiteboard, this is a whiteboard marker, the necessity to write on a whiteboard exists in this room. Excuse me. And that is why there's a whiteboard marker in this room. So much so that if there was a whiteboard marker somewhere, you could be certain that there's going to have to be a whiteboard somewhere nearby. And someone who wishes to write. Yeah, because of course pens don't write themselves, so we need someone to write. Meaning there's a purpose, there's a necessity. Anything else in this room, you could say the same thing. There are lights attached to the ceiling of this hall. So if there are lights, what does that say? Means there are people who wish to not be in a dark room. They want there to be light. The fact that there are chairs in this room means what? People want to sit. That's why there aren't any chairs on the streets. People don't sit on streets, but there are road markings, right? And there are street lights. Why? Because there's a necessity for that. There are cars, because there's a necessity for people to get from place to place. So, anything and everything in this world, when you look at an object, you can infer that there's a purpose that came into the world before that object did. And the object always came later. It was the successor to the precursor, which was the necessity. So necessity always comes first. Necessity always comes first, and then comes in, I'll just call it an object, just to keep things simple. This object could be anything. So this is always a precursor. So then naturally, whenever there's an object whether you can work it out or not. Okay? Whether you can work it out or not, there has to be a necessity which that object has come to fulfill. Are we all in agreement about that? Does that make sense to everyone? Because this conversation, this argument has to build on that premise. This is the foundation. So, then we started talking about something that is very close to all of us, and that is our minds. We have bodies, we have minds. Before we go into the mind, let's take an example from your body. Think of any part of your body. Absolutely any part of your body. Take your eyes, for instance. Right? Keep them open for a second until the end of this sermon. You should get enough sleep the night before the sermon, okay? Otherwise, I can't feed you this dhamma. I have to wake you up from your sleep. Not this sleep. Another sleep. The sleep of ignorance. It is my responsibility to wake you up from the sleep of ignorance. But for that you have to be physically awake as well. Otherwise I can't seek the dhamma in. Right. So take your eyes for example. The fact that you have a pair of eyes says a big story. You don't just have eyes. It's not like it was just there. That's not how it worked. There was a necessity that came before your eyes. What was that necessity? The need to see, absolutely. The need to see. The need to see came first. Eyes came next or later as a response to that need. Yes? So right now this will sound really simple, but I'm going to build up on this concept to something a little bit more abstract. Okay? But for us to get there, allow these simple concepts to sink into your mind. Right? So although it might sound very simple, I would really need you to take it in and assimilate this, because I'm going to build on this and very soon it will get to something a little bit more abstract. And then you will begin to understand how all things in this world have come together and what this world really is. Now, right now, those words will just be words. They may not make a lot of sense. What this world really is, and that's just, what does that mean? Hold on, we'll get there, but I'm giving you a bit of maybe a warning if you like, but not so much a warning in that it's not threatening. I'm just saying, I want you to pay attention to this because it's going to build onto something else. So the need to see came first and eyes came next. It was never the other way around. It was never the other way around. So it's not like all of a sudden there were a pair of eyes and we're wondering, hey, what the heck do we do with these things? Let's open and see. We can see. That's not how it worked. It's not how it worked. It's not like there was a chair and then someone thought, what shall we use this for? Let's try sitting on it. That's not how it worked. It never was. There was always a necessity. That was a precursor to any object. So what about your nose then, if this is the case for your eyes? The need to smell. The need to smell came first and your nose came next. So now here's something interesting. Let's take the need to see. This need to see, where did that arise? What do you think? The need to see. It couldn't have arisen in the eyes, could it? Why not? Why not? Exactly, because the eyes weren't there when the need to see was there. So it couldn't have arisen in the eye. But we tend to think that my eyes want to see. No, your eyes don't want to see. Although they are the faculty that help you see, your eyes have no intention of seeing. There is no need for the eye to see. Your eyes are perfectly fine being shut. From here till the end of your life, Your eyes have no problem at all just being shut. So the eyes have no need to see. So much so that your eyes might even prefer to be shut because, well, it doesn't have to work so hard. Yeah? So it's not the eye that wishes to see. So what is it that wishes to see then? The mind. Very good, very good. So when the mind has a need to see, now the mind has to come up with some way to see. Yes? But the mind is an energy, and out there we have objects. So objects and then energy, how do these things two interact? It's not possible because they are two different media. One's an object, the other is energy. So we're going to have to find a way to translate an object to an energy which the mind can interpret, which the mind can make sense of. Or else we'll have to take the mind and convert that to matter, and then two objects can do something with each other. But the problem we have is that the mind is energy and these objects, they are matter. Yeah? So if there's matter, which is any object here in this room, and your mind is an energy, now we need to figure out how we can translate this object to an energy that the mind can make sense of. So the mind sets to work then. Because the mind wishes to see, now the mind sets to work. So the mind now starts to figure out, what can I do to translate these objects? To translate these objects to an energy that I can understand. So the mind works out a beautiful, incredibly complex mechanism for that. Your eyes are a product of that. You see, this is a very interesting point, ladies and gentlemen. We all understand, this is simple science, that light bounces off objects, light waves, and they reach our eyes and they fall on our retinas. But that's as far as light goes, right? They don't go down the optic nerve. So you can't really be seeing what's out there. Now we know most certainly that the object doesn't travel all the way to the mind. If it could, then we wouldn't need eyes. Right? So it's not like you throw the object down the eye, it goes into the mind wherever the mind is. So that's nonsensical. Light is what bounces off of objects, but that light doesn't go further than the retina either, as you know. There's your light, right? That's your optic nerve there. You have the fovea, right? And your rod cells and your cone cells and whatnot. And your image falls somewhere here, and that is the image. Right? This is as far as light goes. Light does not travel beyond that. So then it is not light that we see, is it? Seeing doesn't happen here. Why doesn't seeing happen here? Work it out from this. Would there have been any point in seeing happening here at the eye? Why not? Because the eye has no intention to see. Go back to basics again. Things wouldn't happen if there was no purpose. This pen would not be here if there was no need to write. Does the eye wish to see? Does the eye wish to see? No. Then is there any reason for the eye to be able to see? Please think about what I'm asking you. Would there be any reason? Would there be any cause? Would there be any purpose in the eye being able to see? Because the eye does not wish to see. If the eye does not wish to see, meaning there is no necessity for the eye to see, then seeing is not a phenomenon that can happen at the eye, because there's no necessity for that. What is it that wishes to see? The mind wishes to see, not the eye. So wherever there is a necessity, that is the only place where that necessity is going to be fulfilled. Does that make sense? That's why we don't have street lights here. We have these lights. That's why I said we don't have chairs on the roads, because people there don't want to sit. They want to go places. Yeah? So, now, what would be the situation in which an eye would be able to see? In what circumstance might an eye have the faculty to see? If what? If it was the eye that wished to see, okay? If it was the eye that wished to see, then we could say that sight happens here. Sight, as you know it, like you can see me right now, can't you? You can see all these objects around you, right? For that to happen at the eye must have a necessity to see, but the eye doesn't. If that didn't make sense, please put your hand up for a second. I'm happy to go over it again. All right, I'll go over it once more. I can go over it 100 times more, it's fine. You just let me know. I'm in no rush, you're in no rush. We just want to make sense of ourselves, right? And we can't do that rushed. Right, once again. This is a cup that's for the Swamin Wahanse to use. Right? You don't have one of these with you, do you? No, and I don't drink out of bottle either. I drink out of one of these. So when you see that one of these is here, you know that the Swamin Wahanse is due to arrive. When you see the Pavada, when you see the Muthukuda, you know that a Swamin Wahanse is due to arrive. So the object tells you about a necessity. Whether that necessity is immediately evident or not, you can infer that there's a necessity for there to be an object that fulfills that necessity. Yes? Right. Excellent. Then, my question to you is, do you think that it is the eye that sees? This eye, this muscular eye, this physical object, eye, the one that you have in your eye lobes, eye socket, sorry. Do you think seeing happens here? Why not? Because there's no necessity for what? To see. Because there's no necessity to see, it would be impossible for seeing to happen here. Because for anything to happen, any phenomena to take place, a necessity has to be the precursor to that. So where does the need to see happen? In the mind. If it's in the mind, the necessity to see is, then seeing must also happen there, not in the eye. Make sense? Wonderful. So light travels only as far as the back of the eye. From there on, you have no light. Yes? Okay, then answer this question for me. Is it light that you see? That's what you learned for science at school, though. There's the visible spectrum. Visible light. That's what we used to learn, right? Visible light. And then there's invisible light, we call them infrared. Or on the other side, we have ultraviolet. And the frequencies that we could see, we used to call the visible spectrum. It actually gave us this impression that that must be the spectrum of radio frequencies or ultramagnetic radiations that we can actually see. So you think I'm actually seeing all this. Your eyes are seeing is the impression that we get. But it cannot be so because the eye has no intention to see, no necessity to see, so seeing cannot happen here, and light only travels as far as the retina, meaning it cannot be light that we see. Now, maybe there's another dot that will place in between these two dots so you can connect those dots together, which I believe is this dot. You agree with me that it is the mind that wishes to see. Yeah? If it's light that we see, here's something else that has to have happened. Light must travel all the way to the mind. If light were able to travel all the way to the mind, right? So down your optic nerve, it's still light. Just imagine. Like you have a fiber optic cable, right? So it's still light that travels all the way and then it goes to the mind. If that were the case, then we would come to the conclusion that it is light that we see. But light doesn't travel any further than the eye socket. And yet we see. But the necessity to see is in the mind, not in the eye. So now deduce something from that. It is not light that we see. But don't we always feel like, I can't see, switch on the light please? I can't see enough, it's too dark, can you turn on the light please? Can you turn on the light please so I can see? We think that it is our eyes that see and that it is light that we see. It's neither of them. So in fact, you even say that light has various frequencies, and these frequencies, they have different colors. Right? One color would have, one frequency might have the color red, the other frequency might have a color green, another frequency might have the color blue, and so on. And then you say the various combinations of these give you the other shades of color. And then you think, well, it's those frequencies that we see, and therefore we see the different colors. How? How is that so? So if you learn science at school, this is unscience. It cannot be light that you see. Why do I say once again it cannot be light that you see? Because let's start here. The eye has no intention to see. If so, seeing would happen right here, right? But seeing happens in the mind. And if it was light that you saw in the mind, then light would have to travel all the way to the mind. Because we know, thanks to medical science, that light does not travel all the way to the mind, in fact it does not get any further than your retina, then it cannot be light that you see. So come out of that thinking that it is light that you see. Let's switch to another organ, another sense organ. Let's take sound, for instance. So you learned about the world at school, now you're unlearning things about the world. You will leave this room as dumb as anything. And all those years you spent at college and all that money you spent learning, maybe that's why parents don't send their children here. Everything you learned, you're going to unlearn. Take sound, for instance. So we have this feeling that it is the sound that we hear. You think that you're hearing my voice. And what is your sense organ that lets you hear that? Your ear. You think your ear hears sound. Your ear hears no sound at all. In fact, your ear is deaf. What is to be deaf? To not be able to hear, right? So, isn't this deaf? Come on, play along. Isn't this deaf? Why? It's as blind as it is deaf, right? Because it doesn't see, you can say it's blind. Because it can't hear, you can say it's deaf. What about this one? Isn't this deaf? It's deaf. Isn't this blind? It's blind. Right? What about your eye? Is it not deaf? Well, let's go with the simple one. Is it not deaf? Huh? Where does sight happen? In the mind. So isn't the eye blind? So aren't you all blind? If it's the eye I'm talking about, aren't all your eyes blind? Right? Okay, now let's come to the ear then. Does the ear hear? The ear organ, does it hear? No. Because to hear is to be able to perceive sound. That is what hearing is, the perception of sound. Well, last week we talked about where perception happens. Where does perception happen? What is the object of perception? What is the instrument of perception? The mind. So is your mind here, somewhere in your ear? In your earlobes maybe? Or down the ear canal? No, that's not where your mind is. If that's not where your mind is, then that cannot be where what happens? Hearing happens. So if that cannot be where hearing happens, then what can you tell me about your ears? They are deaf. No wonder these sermons are not making any impact on you. Music to deaf ears. So your ears are deaf and your eyes are blind. So I'm preaching to the deaf and blind. Ayyo. Okay, then by extension of what we learned here about the eye, we know that the eye has no need to see. Now, once again, remember, we are working on the foundation that we laid down right at the beginning. That is, unless there's a necessity, there is never going to be an object to fulfill X necessity. So X necessity has to come first, X object comes next. If Y necessity comes first, Y object comes to fulfill that necessity. So if X is the necessity, do you think Y is the object? No. If X is the necessity, then X has to be the object. If Y is the necessity, Y has to be the object. It's not going to be like this. Never. Yeah? Okay. So if the eye cannot see, and then we talked about the ear, and hearing does not happen at the ear, that's because there is no necessity to hear. The ear does not have a necessity to hear. That's why hearing doesn't happen at the ear. I'll say that again. The ear has no necessity to hear. I can only apologize for the fact that those two words sound so similar. I didn't invent the language. The ear has no necessity to hear, and that is why hearing does not happen at the ear. If the necessity to hear was that of the ear, where would hearing happen? At the ear. Also doesn't have to be at the end of the ear. Oh boy. I'm only digging myself an even deeper hole. So that's why hearing doesn't happen at the ear, ladies and gentlemen, because the ear does not have a necessity to hear. That's why. That's why this cannot hear, because there's no necessity to hear. What I want you to understand is this interconnection, this strong link, this strong dependency on any object for there being a necessity as a precursor. Unless there's a necessity, there's never something that comes into being, into existence. That is a fundamental concept I really need you to get into your minds. Unless there's a necessity, nothing comes into existence. So for every single grain of sand on this planet, all the way to the mountains, and the earth, and all the planets, and the solar system, and the whole universe, for everything there is out there, there's one thing you can say for certain. What is that? There was a necessity that came first. Objects don't just come into being. Objects come into being because there's a necessity. Are we all clear on that? Please give me another show of hands if that didn't make sense. Excellent. All right, then we can move forward. Let's take this word necessity. It's a beautiful word. Necessity. I want you to take a moment now and think about this. Where do necessities occur? Didn't see that coming, did you now? Hold on. No object would come into being unless there is a necessity. What about necessity itself? Today is one Sunday you should have stayed at home and slept. I'm going to give you a brain fry. If an object always has to follow a necessity, all right, what about necessity itself? Would a necessity come into being unless unless there was what? Unless there was a necessity for necessity. I mean, if you work out the logic and you follow this logic through, then that has to be the conclusion, don't you think? If all things, I mean, we've used plenty of examples by this point. We used examples from your body, used examples out in the world, right? Nothing has ever come into being unless there was a necessity beforehand, prior to that. So if that is true for all things that have come into existence, is there a necessity here, up here? Here. No, you're looking there. I'm pointing here. Okay, here. I know this is a fan, and there was a necessity that brought this into existence. That is fine. That's not what I'm asking actually. What I'm asking you is there a necessity in this fan? Do you think the fan wants something? Do you think this wants something? No, right? No. Why? Because there's no... yes. We're getting somewhere. Right? Take any other object in this room. These are the two things that are closest to me, so I'll use it again. This pen. Do you think this pen has a necessity for something? Now, don't you be saying, well, you need to fill ink into this from time to time, so it has a necessity. No. You can keep this dry for years if you wanted to. It's not going to complain. It might not write, but do you think the pen has a need to write? I mean, if you didn't write with this, do you think it's going to fall out with you or something? Just say you threw the pen, you throw it in the bin. The next day you think, you know what, I'm going to pick it up again. You think the pen's going, no, if you don't want me once, I don't want you 100 times. Like some people do. You have this experience, so I can relate to them, right? So like some people, if you don't want me once, I don't want you 100 times. Do you think the pen is ever going to say that to you? Do you think the pen is ever going to feel unloved by you and so not love you back in return? No, right? So you can throw the pen away anytime you want, you can pick it up anytime you want, you can treat it with love and respect anytime you want, and you can treat it with no love and disrespect anytime you want. You can swear at it, you can curse at it, and then you can say loving and affectionate words to it. It would not treat you any differently, would it? Not at all. Why? Because the pen has no necessity. Don't say mine just yet, we'll get there. Hold on. Hold your horses. It has no necessity. That's why. It has no necessity to be treated with love, with respect, or this way, or that way, or the other way. None of that. It's just a pen. So much so, ladies and gentlemen, this pen has no idea that it's a pen. Did you know that? See, that's why you can play with this if you want. You can play sword fight with this. If there's no teacher in the classroom, and there were a bunch of these pens in the classroom, what would students do? Sword fight. I'm God. You could do that with this. Or you could use it as a paperweight. No complaints, because there's no necessity here. And that's because necessity also arises when there's a necessity for necessity. Because necessity itself is a phenomenon. Just as much as this object itself is a phenomenon. Just as much as this fan is a phenomenon. It's an object that has come into being, and although necessity is not an object per se that has length, width, breadth, it's not a three-dimensional object, it's an abstract concept, even concepts come into being because there's a necessity. Can't you teach yourself to love someone? Can't you teach yourself to love someone? Let's take an example. Say if any of you are in an arranged marriage. Like some of you in the room might have gotten to an arranged marriage. Did you not have to teach yourself to love that person? So love then is a concept. It's not a fixed. It's not a material thing. It has no length, width, breadth. It's a mental concept, and it can be taught. In other words, you can, where there's a necessity, you can create it. It will manifest. Yeah? So if that is true for love, can't you learn to respect your seniors? Say a man on the street, he's just another man on the street. But then tomorrow you realize he's your new boss. Now, can't you learn to treat him or her with respect? But how long is respect? With breadth? No, it's a mental concept. So that also is a phenomenon, and the fact that it's a mental phenomenon does not stop you bringing it in, creating it, if there's a necessity for that. Yes? Okay. So then all things in this world, including mental things that we conceive, are all there because there's a necessity that has to be fulfilled. Then what about necessity itself? It's the same. Necessity does not arise unless there's a need for necessity. Are you all clear on that so far? Again, give me a show of hands if that's not clear to you. Perfect. Just as I said, perfect. That's fine. So necessity is a mental concept, just like love, respect, right? These are things that you can teach yourself to do if there's a necessity for that. Right? I gave the example of someone who's a stranger becomes your boss. Now you can develop, you can cultivate respect in your mind. An arranged marriage, you can teach yourself to love that person. So that's a concept that you can inculcate in your mind and develop and cultivate in your mind. In the same way, necessity can also be created in your mind where there's a necessity for necessity, where there's a need for necessity to happen. So that's the concept so far. Okay, things will start to make more sense as we go further. But I just want you to, because I told you that some of these are going to be a little bit abstract. But I'm not just wasting your time here talking to you about abstract concepts. I'm really trying to get to something here. And you will realize very soon what it is I'm trying to get to. So all objects, all phenomena, whether they are physical or mental, they only come into existence where there's a necessity for it.
Mother of invention.
Absolutely, yes. Yes. That's we quoted that last week as well, I think. Necessity is the mother of invention, isn't it? So all inventions have a necessity as a precursor to it. Now, let's go back to the eye for a second. If the mind had another way to see, do you think an eye would be necessary? This physical, this eye that we have, the eye that we studied at school for biology, do you think that particular construction, that particular arrangement of cells and blood and all sorts that make the eye, do you think that particular arrangement would be necessary if the mind had another way to see? If the mind could see through the ear, just imagine, do you think an eye also would be necessary? No. So the eye is not necessary, is it? What is necessary? To see is what is necessary. It's not the eye. So is the ear necessary? Is the ear, the physical ear, is it necessary? No. To hear is what is necessary. And the same goes for the other sensations as well. To smell is necessary but not the nose. To taste is necessary but not the tongue. And to feel tactile sensations, that is necessary but not the body. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, people walk and use artificial limbs. It matters not whether that is natural or artificial. As long as it gets the job done, that's all. So what you need to understand then, one point to take from here is, your bodies are of no concern to your mind, really. It cares not one bit about your body as long as it serves the master. So as long as the mind can see, smell, taste, touch, and hear, as long as the mind can do those things, it does not care about your eye or your ear, about your nose, your tongue, or about any other part of your body. It does not care one bit. It does not care. It's just a device. It's just an instrument, a device even, that the mind uses to get what it wants done. The mind is always king here, ladies and gentlemen. Let's not forget that. The mind is king. The mind is the master here. That is why we are studying the mind. This is mindology. We're learning about the mind here. Because you are your mind, after all. As much as you might think, I'm this 6 foot tall and I'm this fat, this big, this tall, none of that is you. You are the mind. Whatever you think, that's what you are. That's what you are. So then we have no need for eye, ear, nose, tongue. What we have is a need to see, hear, smell, taste, and touch. Whose is we? That's the mind. All right? To see, to hear, to smell, to taste, and to touch, if you put all of those things into one basket, you could say, to what? Starts with P. To perceive, absolutely, to perceive. If you could put all that into one basket, you could say, to perceive. So when you are seeing something, which you're doing right now, if you're looking at me right now, you're seeing that. When you're seeing something, what you're actually doing is perceiving. Excuse me. It's 1/6 of all your perceptions. Why do I say 1/6? It's either seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, excuse me, touching, or thinking. Thinking is also perception. I don't tend to spend a lot of time on this because we can work quite simply on the other 5, but the same concept applies to the 6th as well. It just gets a little bit more complicated because it's the mind doing it all on its own, right? By using thoughts which are all in its own realm, right? But it's easier for us to understand when we talk about the other 5. That's why I don't spend too much time talking about that, but the same concept applies. Okay? So let's not make it overly complicated. So these 5 and the additional 1, so this 6, if you were to put it all into one basket, you could say it is to perceive. It's the mind that does that. Why is it that perception happens at the mind? To answer that, you could start with this question. Why does seeing not happen at the eye? Are you all in agreement that seeing doesn't happen at the eye? Yes? We talked about this a moment ago, right? So why doesn't seeing happen at the mind? No, sorry. Why doesn't seeing happen at the eye? Because the eye has no necessity to see. Okay, then why does seeing happen at the mind? Because the mind has a necessity to perceive, absolutely. So then seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, all in all, perceiving is a necessity of the mind. And that's why it happens there. Where? In the mind. To mind is to perceive. It's as simple as that. Please mind the gap between the train and the platform. So when they say that, what are they actually saying? Please perceive the gap between the platform and the train. That's what they're saying. Perceive the gap. Because to mind is to perceive, it, nothing more. Of course, what they mean is be aware, and beware that there's a gap, and you might put your foot in that, and you might cause harm. You might have a fall. But to mind is actually to perceive. That is to mind, to become conscious, to become aware. Now, can I take you down the memory lane once again to go back to Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankara, Vijnana? We talked about this some time ago, a few sermons back, maybe even a couple of months back. Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankara, Vijnana, these are the 5 parts that have to work together to enable perception. In other words, when these 5 things work in unison, when these 5 things work together, when these 5 things meet, they meet. It's a meeting. When these 5 things meet, what you have there is perception. It's a bit like this. Now you're all here today. This is also a meeting of sorts, isn't it? You have come here to meet Swamin Wahanse, and together we meet Dhamma. That's a meeting. But you also find yourselves in various other meetings, don't you? Throughout the course of the week. Sometimes it feels like that's all I've done all week. From one meeting to the next meeting. No work has actually been done. It's just meeting people and agreeing to do things but not actually doing those things. Ring a bell? Yeah, I read it in a book. Whenever I say I read it in a book, that book is titled The Book of Life. I've been there, done that. That's what I mean. So this is a meeting of sorts. We coming together here on a Sunday morning, this is a meeting of sorts. Now, when you get home, you call that your family. When you're at home, that's family. When you're at work, you don't call that family. Maybe for some of you, that's more family than at home. Horses for courses, right? But I suppose. But when you're at home, you call that family. Let's say, when you're at your Toastmasters club, that's another meeting. When you're at your Rotaract club, that's another meeting. When you're at your Interact club, that's another meeting. When you're at your Leo club, the Alliance club, that's another meeting. Whenever you're in a meeting, it's the causes that have come together that define what meeting it is. That's how you know you're at home with your family. Because when you're at home, you open your eyes and you see who's there. Yeah, that's how you know you're at home. You open your eyes and then you see, there's my wife, there's my husband, not for the same person, I'm just saying. There's your husband, there's your wife, there's your mother, there's your father, there's your brother, there's your sister, maybe your children. So when they're there, in other words, when they meet, we call that a family meeting. A family get-together, if you like. That's one kind of meeting. So if there are 5 of you, let's say you're all grown-ups now, you've all gone your own way. Right? One lives in Canada, the other lives in Australia, the other lives in You're in the UK, somewhere, someone lives in everywhere else. But once a year, you all get together. That's a family reunion, a family get together, a family meeting. So when the 5 of you come together, right, and you have your folks there as well, now you say, that's our family. How did that happen? Did that happen when they got on the flights to come to your rendezvous? Did that happen then? No. It was after you all met in one place and you were all in close proximity to each other, then you said, now it's a family reunion. It's a meeting. So, Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankhara and Vijnana are the same. When these 5 things come together, you have a meeting of these 5 things. And when they meet with purpose. So if you meet for Thanksgiving, we don't do Thanksgiving here. When you meet for Christmas, or when you meet for the New Year, when you meet for Sinhala Tamil New Year, when you meet for whatever, when you meet for that, you meet with purpose. If there's no purpose, would that be a meeting? No, when you meet, what's the first thing you tend to talk about? Before you convene the meeting, you say, right, we have met here today to discuss XYZ. So you set your theme, the theme for the meeting. So there's a necessity that comes before the meeting. There's a necessity that comes before the meeting. The same truth applies to Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankhara and Vijnana, ladies and gentlemen. There's a necessity that comes before these 5 things meet. And when they do meet, that necessity is fulfilled. What is that necessity once again? Starts with P. Perception. Absolutely. So Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankhara and Vijnana, they take a meeting because the necessity to perceive is there. Now then tell me, if there was no necessity to perceive, would these 5 things meet? If there was no Thanksgiving, if there was no year end, if there was no New Year, if there was no birthday party, if there was no get together, would you all meet? If we had no Sunday sermon, what would we all be doing right now? Still come here and just while the hours? No sermon. No Swami Nuhanse, no sermon. Would you still come here? No, they wouldn't let you. But you wouldn't come here. You'd have other things to do with your time, wouldn't you? You'd be in some other meeting, wouldn't you? You'd be meeting with your family. You'd be meeting with your colleagues. Maybe your, old school friends. You want to get together, do something like maybe go to the shop, do your shopping. So at the shop, you're again meeting with the shopkeeper. That's another meeting because you have a purpose. He has something to sell. You have something to buy. It's a common purpose. So you see, all coming together in this world is always to address a necessity. I'll say that again. All coming together, all coming togethers, all get-togethers, all meetings, all reunions, all unions in fact, are always to address, to fulfill a purpose. If there was no purpose, there would be no meeting. All in agreement so far? If that didn't make sense, please put your hand up. Wonderful. You're a good class. You're a very good class, actually. I enjoyed this class. It's a good class. Because you don't come empty-handed. You bring your merits with you. That's why this is making sense. This doesn't make sense to everybody. You'll be surprised. I've given this talk to many audiences. Not everyone gets it. You might think, how can they not get it? It's just so simple. No, it's not so simple. This is an abstract concept. I can't show it to you like this. It has to make sense in your mind. And for that you have to have the mental ability, the mental capacity. And that comes with your merit power. That's why I say you don't come here just, empty-handed and empty pocket. You come here with merits. And that is what helps you to make sense of this. That's why the Buddha gives one sermon. A bunch of them have attained Sotapanna, another bunch have attained Sakudagami, another bunch have attained Anagami, others have attained Arahathood, and some just walk away as Pruthagjanas. They haven't got it. In the same audience. The same sermon by the same Buddha. Okay. So back to topic. All meetings then are always to fulfill a purpose, a necessity. So where there is no necessity then, no meetings would take place. Yes? Where there is no necessity, no meetings would take place. Do you not see a meeting here? Now, once again, I'm jumping here a little bit from this to that. You see, this is a leaf from a what tree? A what tree? Talipot. Did I pronounce that right? Talipot. Thank you. So from that. So it's a leaf from that talipot plant. And then you have some thread. Then you have some wood, right? You have a nail here that keeps all this together. This is a meeting, ladies and gentlemen. See, this is a meeting. Do you see the meeting here? A bunch of parts have met. They don't have a purpose. They don't have any intention to meet. Because, of course, they're inanimate objects. They don't have the faculty or the ability to have a purpose. They can't conceive purpose. But someone with purpose did what? They met these things together. And now you have a fan. The pen is the same. There's a nib somewhere here. There's a cap. There's the barrel. There's a thing here. And then there's ink inside. This is a meeting. This meeting has only happened because there was a necessity for that. Now, think of anything else in this room. I'm just giving you a few more examples so you can actually really grasp this concept. Think of anything else in this room and do it yourself. There are plenty of things in this room you could think of. Just think of anything for a moment and see how that's a meeting of things. I'll give you a moment to do that. Think of anything in this room, any object in this room, and see if you can figure out how it's a meeting of things. Why are you all looking at me? Creepy. Well, the truth is, it is also a meeting. Everything that this is made out of is a meeting. The head has met the neck. The neck has met the shoulders. The shoulders have met the arms. That all happens at once. The arms have met the hands have met the fingers have met the nails, and the skin, and the muscle, and the bones, and the veins, and the blood. This is a fabulous meeting. And what can you tell me about all meetings? What, they go on forever? No. All meetings must come to an end. When do they come to an end? When their purpose has been met. When their purpose has been met, or when their purpose, actually, to put it better, when the necessity for that meeting no longer exists. When the necessity for that meeting no longer exists, that meeting will cease from there on. So we say the meeting has been adjourned. Can't you adjourn this meeting? This meeting, can you not adjourn it? I can. Any volunteers? If I just smash this on something, that meeting would be adjourned. How about this? Is this not a meeting? This is a meeting of ceramic. There are a trillion molecules here of stuff, whatever that stuff is. We don't need to get very scientific here, right? All that stuff have come together and they are in a meeting. So don't bother them, they're in a meeting right now. Could I not adjourn this meeting right now? Shall we try that? If there is no longer a necessity for this meeting, I could adjourn it, couldn't I? Yes. In fact, I could adjourn it and then use those elements in another meeting. That's why we have this concept called recycling. That's how we have a concept called recycling. So you might have a plastic water bottle with you. That water bottle is a meeting. They're in a meeting right now. Don't disturb them. I mean, it almost comes like naturally, doesn't it? They're in a meeting, don't bother them. So your plastic bottle is in a meeting. Once the necessity for that meeting is spent, is done, is exhausted, what could you do with that bottle now? You can adjourn that meeting and make one of these out of it. This then is another meeting. So don't you think then that anything you can conceive in this world, any object, to keep it simple at the beginning, any object that you see in your world, ladies and gentlemen, in your world, right, in this world that you see, aren't they all in meetings? What about the ceiling right now? What if that meeting adjourned? Let's hope not. Not at least until we have left the room, right? What if the chair that you're sat on decided to adjourn its meeting? It's happened once in a while. Once in a while it happens. Right? While you're already still sat on there, the chair decides to adjourn the meeting. There's a light bulb above your head. And what if that meeting's adjourned? What happens to the bulb? It goes out. Maybe the fuse blows. So don't you see how everything in this world is actually in a meeting? They're in a meeting. Don't bother them. See, the concept I'm trying to introduce to you in as simply as I possibly can is that there's nothing in this world that's actually fixed and permanent. Nothing is done. Done. They're all in a meeting. You, this, we're in a meeting. Your body and the parts that make it up, it's in a meeting. The hair on your head, that's a meeting. That's why once in a while you go to the salon, you go to the barbers, and you have the barber adjourn some of those meetings, not all of them. Or you send some of them away. We don't need you for this meeting. Yeah? You do that, don't you? Once every 2 or 3 days, I completely adjourn that meeting. Because that meeting is an annoyance to me. Whereas for you, it's fine. You shouldn't adjourn those meetings just yet. Why? Why do I adjourn this meeting? You know what I'm talking about, right? Yeah? Why do I adjourn that meeting? There's no necessity, absolutely. Why do you not adjourn that meeting? So you keep the meeting in session Because you have a necessity. So then why are all meetings in session? Because there's a necessity. Once the necessity ceases to exist, the meeting ceases to exist. Nothing is fixed, ladies and gentlemen. Nothing is done. They're all in a meeting right now. The flow above the flow below your feet, it's in a meeting right now. Let's hope they don't adjourn just yet. I want you to start to think about everything you can conceive in your mind about as a meeting, including emotions that you have, if you'd like to venture that far. When you feel anger, what do you think that is? Don't you think that's a meeting? Are you always angry? Like, are you angry right now? Shall I try to make you angry first though? You're not angry right now because, why are you not angry right now? There's no necessity. Shall I create one? So when are you angry? When you feel the necessity for that, that's when you are angry. I know you don't anger yourself up. I know that, because no one enjoys being angry. But if there's a necessity for anger, anger happens. So when there's no necessity for anger, that meeting will not be convened. That's what I'm saying. Right from physical things to mental things. All phenomena are in a meeting, and they're forever ready to go back to chaos. They're forever ready to return to chaos. It is that necessity that keeps them in that meeting. This is a bit of a heavy sermon, but your merit power will help you understand this. I didn't expect to say any of this today, but somehow it's coming out of us, not me, us. All things will be in a meeting for as long as there's a necessity. Once that necessity has been exhausted, or when that necessity no longer exists, that meeting of things are always and forever prepared to go into chaos. Meaning everything is ready to disperse. Always ready. For example, if I were to stand up right now and say, that's it, sermon done. I mean, what would you do after that? You'd remain seated? No, then you'd also stand up and make your way home, wouldn't you? Why would you do that? It's not because Swami Nibbāna stood up. It is not because Swami Nibbāna stood up. It's because the necessity has now ceased. Once Swami Nibbāna is not here, you know that that sermon is no longer going to happen. And you're here because you want the sermon. And if the sermon's not going to be there, then there's no point in me being there. So once that necessity has ceased, there's no longer any need for you to be here. Therefore, of course, you leave the room. Does that not say something about you? Here's what it says about you, to me. It says that you're not a fixed element of this meeting. You don't have to be here. That doesn't sound right. I'm not saying you don't have to be here. You can get out of the room, all of you. That's not. It's not that what I mean. What I'm actually trying to say is, you are not bound to be here. You know, it's not like if you're either here or you're nowhere. That is not the case, right? So then here's my question to you. Listen carefully and try and answer. Where do you have to be? Actually, I'll phrase this question better. Is there somewhere you have to be? So Sunday mornings, you're here. Maybe Sunday afternoon, you do your shopping on your way back home. Maybe Saturdays, you are with your family. Maybe Monday to Friday, you go to work and you're there. When you are at work, do you have to be there? Oh. Well, yes, of course you have to be there. It's not I don't mean it in that way. Your boss is going to come and, what are you talking to about my people these days? Huh? You're telling them that they don't have to be at work? No, you have to be there, please. Be there. That's not what I mean. I mean, is it like if you're either there or you don't exist? Is it something like that? No, right? I mean, you could be anywhere, you just happen to be there because there's a necessity. It's the necessity that keeps you there, nothing more. It's your necessity that keeps you here. It's the necessity that keeps you anywhere. In a meeting, because you're always in a meeting. You're always in a meeting, ladies and gentlemen. When you're in your living room, you're in a meeting. When you're in the kitchen, you're in a meeting. When you're in your bedroom, you're in the meeting. You're in your washroom, you're in a meeting. Sometimes a meeting with yourself. Because you have a necessity. But that's still a meeting with intention. There's a necessity that has to be fulfilled. That's why you're there. Sometimes you have a necessity to not do anything. And then you're there, wherever that is, where you cannot do anything. So man walks the dog. He's at the park, he's walking his dog. That's a necessity. And it's a meeting. The man has met his dog. The dog has met the man. And then they've met at the park. That's where that necessity is to be fulfilled. So that's why the man and dog is walking or are walking in the park. What happens when that necessity is done? Should a man always be walking his dog? Like that's what a man was born for, to walk the dog. Should the dog always be walked by his master? Is that what a dog was born for? Should that alleyway or that pathway that on which right now there's a man walking his dog, is that what that pathway was built for? Just for a man to walk his dog and nothing else could happen? No, right? In other words, there is nothing that is done. There's nothing that is written off for X. Does that make sense, ladies and gentlemen? Nothing is written off for X or Y or Z. It's all simply taking part in a meeting because there's a necessity. When there is no longer a necessity, that meeting ceases. What that should help you realize then is that nothing in this world is fixed. Nothing in this world is wholly, completely, entirely and comprehensively one thing and one thing alone. Nothing is like that. Nothing whatsoever. Do you remember once we did a sermon on chicken and how that becomes you? Do you remember that sermon? I brought a video and I showed you how someone eats chicks. So you first slaughter the animal, then you defeather it, you you eat it, right? And then in your body what happens? It is ingested, right? And then decomposed and recomposed to make proteins. So then what is chicken? Just imagine a slice of chicken or a piece of chicken on your plate. Not now, Swami Nuhan's. A piece of chicken on your plate. What is that? Give me one word. It starts with M. It's a meeting. A piece of chicken is a meeting. Is it always going to be that meeting? How are you going to adjourn that meeting? By eating it. Because once you start chewing it, what happens? Oh, you don't even need to chew. You have your cutlery. At the moment you put your knife through that chicken, what are you doing to that meeting? You're beginning to adjourn that meeting, right? Let's summarize then. And then whatever fragments of that meeting are left, the moment you stick it in your mouth and it goes down your food pipe and your gastric juices start working on it, what happens? It starts to completely and entirely adjourn, right down to the molecules that make it up, even down to the atoms. So is there such a thing called chicken? As in a non-changing, a fixed entity called chicken. Is there such a thing? No. All there are meetings. Does it not feel like the whole world is just a bunch of meetings? Especially at work, don't you feel that way? Well, guess what, ladies and gentlemen? That's the deal. All of this is just meetings, and more meetings. All of these things are just meetings. Meetings that have met, meetings that have convened because there's a necessity for that meeting. Once that necessity is fulfilled or has been exhausted, no longer there, then that meeting can be adjourned, and those elements which made up that meeting are now free to take part in another meeting. That's how the world works. That is why we say that everything's in a process. Don't we say a meeting is in progress? A meeting's in progress. Well, when that meeting ceases, what happens to the members of that meeting? They disperse, and then they are in something else then. That's also another meeting. So another meeting is in progress. And once that meeting is done, then they adjourn and then they meet for something else, and then that meeting is in progress. So it constantly, meetings are in progress. Constantly. This is the concept of anicca. That nothing is fixed. Nothing has been written off. You understand the concept of written off? Allow me to use a singular term here. We say, sinna karalina. Right? Written off, that's it, done, dusted. It's not that. Nothing has been written off. They're temporarily taking part in a meeting. Why in that particular meeting? Necessity. Driven by necessity. So then all phenomena that you see are merely collections of things. That's why they're called aggregates. To aggregate is to bring together things. That's why they're called skandha. You've heard the pancha skandha. Rupa skandha, Vedana skandha, Sanya skandha, Sankhara skandha, Vijnana skandha. These skandhas together we call the pancha skandha. The English term for this is the aggregates. An aggregation is to bring together things. Why do they come together? Because they have a meeting. That's why they come together. What is the precursor to the meeting? Necessity. Indeed. So it is only out of necessity do meetings take place. So then what does that tell you about all skandhas, all aggregations, all aggregates, the 5 aggregates? They're only there because there's a necessity. That's why they're called aggregates, not entities. They're there because there's a necessity. Meaning that meeting, the lifespan of that meeting is the lifespan of a necessity. As soon as that necessity has ceased, that meeting it's time for that meeting to adjourn. Not a moment more will a meeting remain after a necessity has adjourned. Does that make sense to all of you? What we've talked there? Let me quickly plug it back to what we've been speaking here about the mind and all sorts, so that this is a complete picture. You can walk away with more than just a headache. So we talked about the mind. If I go back to the eye, right from where we started, seeing is not a necessity of the eye. Seeing is a necessity of the mind. So the eye merely serves the mind's objective purpose to fulfill, to achieve seeing, which is a necessity of the mind. So the mind will always want to see for as long as it has a necessity to see. Okay? So you know now that once there's a necessity, things have to come together to serve that necessity. If there's a necessity, ladies and gentlemen, something has to come together to serve that necessity. Something has to. Necessities are never fulfilled just like that. Something has to happen in this world for a necessity to be fulfilled. See, these are all examples of that. The only time where there isn't anything in this world is when? The only time where there isn't anything in this world is when? When there is no necessity. So the what's the word? The word escapes me now. It'll come back to me in a moment. No, it'll come to me when it comes. So if the only time that there's nothing in this world is when there is no necessity, if there is something in this world, whatever that might be, that has to be because there is a necessity. Where there is no necessity for anything, you can think of that state as a state of Nibbāna. There are two states of Nibbāna. I'll quickly point that out. We'll talk about it in more depth another time, but I'll quickly point it out in case you're wondering, but hang on, because some of you might have that problem. There are two necessities that I'm referring to here. One is the necessity to want to see. In other words, I want to see. That itself is a necessity. I want to hear, I want to smell, I want to taste, I want to touch, I want to think. That is a necessity. That necessity is the necessity that ceases once someone becomes an arahant, but they're still alive. So, but their minds are still working. So perception still happens in that mind. Sorry, perception still happens. You can't say perception happens in the mind because perceiving is the mind. So perception still happens. The physical bodies are still intact. But in those perceptions, in that consciousness, in those minds, there is no need or a want to see. But it sees. And that's okay. This is what we call Sopadisesa Nibbāna. So there are two types of Nibbāna. There's Sopadisesa Nibbāna, and then there's a Nibbāna called Anupadisesa Nibbāna. Sorry for throwing those terms at you, but I just want to clarify that in case someone in the audience has a problem. So how come? So otherwise you might ask me, does an Arahant also have necessities? Other than what was the point of becoming an Arahant? So an Arahant does not have any mental necessities because ignorance and attachment have been uprooted for good. There's another piece I have to talk to you about before I can really you can connect these two dots, but I think I'll come back to that another day, maybe next week. What's the connection between necessities and ignorance and attachment is. Okay, so I'll just leave that there for a second. But someone who has become an arahant, their minds are still intact. And that is because, ladies and gentlemen, the necessity to perceive was something they were born with. Because they were not born arahants, were they? No one's born an arahant. Whenever we are born, I think last week we talked about this, we are born with a helping of karmic energy. I drew it on the board if I remember, 500,000 years of this and 200,000 years of that and so on. How human life can go from one form to another and so on. We talked about it last week, I think. Yeah. So an Arahatun Mahansi, before he became an Arahant, he was just a normal human being who had ignorance and attachment. And out of ignorance, out of attachment that was once there, a collection of karmic energy, a helping of karmic energy started off a process. And as part of that, the mind was born. Actually, it would be more appropriate to say the mind base was born. In other words, the environment from which chittas are produced was born. Now it's getting a little bit complicated. So I'll quickly summarize that because we don't need to get into those steps just yet. But let's just put it this way. Say, you've all had milk rice, haven't you? Kiribat. When you make kiribat, when you make milk rice, you have the rice, you boil that, and you have milk. You can have rice without the milk, and that will just be plain rice. But you need the rice onto which you add the milk, because you're not just going to drink coconut milk like that. But you consume the coconut milk with the rice. So the rice can exist on its own, you can have the rice on its own, but you wouldn't normally have the coconut milk on its own. I mean, yes, I know you can have it with something else, maybe pittu or something. That's not what I mean here. I'm talking about milk rice as an example. You could have rice on its own, just boiled rice on its own. But when we make milk rice, we have to add the milk to the rice. So you can imagine rice without the milk. But the milk itself could not be consumed without the rice. Fair enough? Please don't tell me, but you can have that with pittu. Then we are going outside this example. I'm only talking about milk rice here. Okay, so you can have the rice on its own, but you can't have the milk on its own. You add the milk to the rice and then you have milk rice. Right. So imagine the birth of someone before they became an arahant is like someone with milk rice. They have both the rice and milk. Becoming an arahant is like the milk has been taken out, extracted, and they still have the rice. You can still eat it. You can either eat milk rice or you can eat rice. If you were somehow able to take the milk out of the rice, you can still eat the rice, couldn't you? But the milk has to be, can only be where there is rice. It cannot exist on its own. You cannot consume it on its own. It has to come with the rice. But take out the milk, you can still have the rice. That's what happens once one becomes an arahant. They still have the rice, just not the milk. That's an analogy for those of you who are fond of milk rice. So they were born with milk rice. Through their practice, they extracted the milk and they're left with the rice. And then they finish the rice and then that's it, done. So when a human being is born, now to connect that analogy back to the real story, when a human being is born, ladies and gentlemen, you're born with some karmic energy. In that karmic, alongside that karmic energy, the mind has ignorance. That's why we are born, after all. With the mind being ignorant, each chitta, each mind that arises with that karmic energy has a desire or a need to see. It has a need to hear. Do you recall, I once talked to you about a visit to the prison? And then I started to talk to them and I said, my dear people, there's no way you're going to get out without their permission, without the permission of the jailers, but I can help make this no longer a prison for you by helping you take the milk out of the rice. I can help you do away with the need to see, and then it matters not to you whether you see or not. Remember that story? How we could make home out of a prison, and how people make prison out of homes. So a prison is only in the mind. It's not out there. Yes? So a Rahatan Mahansa is someone who has managed to take the wanting out of seeing. So seeing still happens. They just don't want to see. Not wanting to see and avoiding seeing are two different things though. And please make sure you understand that. What I don't want are fake arahants out of you. If you decided to become one, please don't say that you came to Swami Mahasaya's sermons on Sundays. I don't want any fake arahants, someone who wants to see but pretends they don't want to see. There's no point. Who are we fooling? The last thing I want is for any of you to feel that you're holier than thou. We shouldn't be like that. We are the salt of the earth. And if the earth loses its salt, then what good is it? As Jesus Christ once said, all that it is good for is to be trampled on. That's it. So we have to be the salt of the earth. Our humility, our humbleness, our down-to-earthness, this should be the fabric that weaves us. Without that, there's no point learning the Dhamma even. So when you are born with karmic energy, that karmic energy helps us to see, but ignorance and attachment that run alongside the exhaustion of that karmic energy not only sees, but there's also the need to see. What happens with a Rahatan Mahansa, at the point they become a Rahatan Mahansa, is that the need to see ceases. Just like taking out the milk from the milk rice. And the milk rice, or the rice still remains. So you can still eat it. You can still see without the need to see. Does that make sense? Okay. So now let's piece that conversation with the part we talked about earlier about meetings. Now you know then that all things in this world are meetings. Every phenomenon is a meeting. Your mental, your physical realm, whatever there is a meeting. The sky above our heads, the earth below our feet, all of these things are meetings. Everything around us are meetings. We are meetings. This body is a meeting, right? And even the mind is a meeting. Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankara, Vijnana, when they come together with the necessity to perceive. Because there's a necessity to perceive, these five things come together. When these five things come together, ladies and gentlemen, if they come together in the presence of ignorance, okay? We'll talk more about what kind of ignorance in a later sermon. If they come together in the presence of ignorance, there is seeing. Let me put this way, I'll try again. Karmic energy, when we were born, that we were born with rather, is a karmic energy that we tapped into. When we tapped into it, we started to use it up. The moment you were born, you tapped into your karmic energy, and as vipaka, it started flowing. So that's why you're seeing things right now, hearing things right now, smelling, tasting, and so on. You've tapped into your karmic energy, and it's feeding you constantly. This tap is going to remain open for as long as this meeting that you are, this physical form, and this mind base that was born at the point of your creation, for as long as that environment exists, it's going to keep drip feeding from your karmic energy. Remember, when you were born with ignorance. That's the part we must not forget. Ignorance was there, enough ignorance was there for you to kind of get a bunch of karmic energy, and you tapped into it. That does not mean that when ignorance somehow ceases along the way, you can stop it immediately. It's like once you tap into it, you have to use it. Okay? Once you open it, you have to use all of it. Once you open it, once you tap into it, you have to use all of it, with or without ignorance. If you have ignorance, while you're using it, seeing happens and the need to see happens. If you can cease ignorance, seeing happens, and that's it. I'll draw it on the board just to make it clear to you. Some of this is only complicated because you're hearing this for the first time. So please don't worry. I can see some worried faces. Nibbāna is not complicated, don't you worry, okay? So don't think, my God, I thought I was going to get to Nibbāna this lifetime. Nibbāna is not complicated. All you have to do is contemplate anicca, dukkha and anatta. That's all. In fact, some of what we're talking about here, ladies and gentlemen, is just, let's just say that's additional knowledge. You don't have to have this knowledge, but understanding at least some of this further convinces you of the truth of anicca, dukkha and anatta. For example, that meeting concept. And that's a really good way of looking at the world, that all things there are merely meetings and nothing is fixed. That simply helps you to further understand and contemplate the concept of anicca. So here's what I wanted to say. When a chitta arises and passes away, if it does in an environment where there is ignorance, karmic energy is produced. Okay? This karmic energy is not only produced, but it is also consumed to create the chitta. So this is like a self-sufficient system. You don't need support from elsewhere. It's self-sufficient. It creates a karma and it consumes the vipaka. So who's responsible for what's happening to you then? Someone else? No, see, you are wholly and entirely responsible for what's going on in your life right now. Because you sowed, so you shall reap. Absolutely. No one else is responsible for that. The good and the bad, both. Once ignorance ceases, which arm of this ceases? The one on this side. As soon as ignorance is eradicated, the karma generating part of this process ceases. Now it's no longer a cycle. All that happens from there on is vipaka is being consumed and chittas are born. each chitta takes up, consumes some element of vipaka, and that's it. So vipaka is exhausted. It's no longer recharged. Okay? Let's say this is a person's previous life, and now a person's born in this life. We talked about this in the last sermon. You're born a human this time. When you're born a human, ladies and gentlemen, what happens is a portion of this karmic energy that is human related. See, that's why in this life you don't get heavenly abodes. You have to die for that first. I'm sorry to say. Right? I mean, you could offer a kuti to the Mahasangha. Right? Maybe there's a heavenly abode that's created for you. There's enough karmic energy for that. But you can't enjoy that while you are still human. Maybe you have offered a great dana. And as a result of that, you will be born into some celestial abode where you're going to have servants and food, like plenty of everything for years and years and years to come. Maybe a millennia, but you've got to die first for that. Because it's not part of the human pool. It's celestial. That's divine, let's say. So there may be some of it in the Brahmic realm that will be consumed there. There's another part that will be in the four great hells. So maybe some of it is in the four great hells, some in the divine sphere, other in the Brahma plane, and the other in the human plane. But it's all, if you put it all together, it's all your karmic energy. So when you're born human, part of this is anything that is human related. That's the karmic energy you can tap into. You can't tap into any of this stuff. You can't tap into that. You can't tap into this. You can only tap into what is human related and vipakas that come into fruition in the human realm. Is that fair enough? Yes. So, this birth happened where there was ignorance. Because you're not born unless you have ignorance. So whenever you're born, you're born with ignorance. And that ignorance is actually what keeps you bound to your karmic energy. It keeps you bound to your karmic energy. That's why if you can die at the moment of your death, if you have no ignorance whatsoever, then this karmic energy no longer comes back to you. It is dispersed. Like I said, all things are together only because there's a necessity, including your karmic energy. Because you have a need to go in samsara, your karmic energy is bound to you. If there is no longer a necessity to go through in samsara, what happens? Then this energy is of no use. Then what happens? It disperses, goes into chaos. All things are like that, including your karmic energy. So the reason you can't escape from your karmic energy right now is because you have ignorance here. The need to keep going on in samsara. You have a need for that. That's why you're going on in samsara, not because of me. I didn't do anything to you. That's why you're coming to the sermons, because you understand that in here is also some of this, good Lord, the four great hells. And in the human sphere, it's not just the good stuff. What about when you stub your toe on something? That's also human. When you burn your fingers on something, when you prick something, right? When someone hits you, when you get a toothache, when you get a backache, these are all human, isn't it? So that's all also part of the human existence, because you can't pick and choose just the good stuff and leave the bad stuff out. It doesn't work that way. It comes all as a package. So if you are born as human, you have to endure everything that is human related. Old age, sickness, the lot. Tough, right? Well, that's the way it is. That's why there's only one escape. That is why the dhamma is the only refuge. If you can eradicate ignorance, then you sever the connection that you have to your karma. It's a bit like throwing something up in the air, say a rock. Before it comes down on you, you move away. Wouldn't that be nice if you could do that? So just imagine you've thrown plenty of rocks up in the air and they're on their way back down. Some you've thrown all the way up, kilometers up into the sky, others some several hundred meters, others maybe a few centimeters. And some of those are little pebbles, others are mountains. And when they come on your head, you'll be splattered on the ground. Others will just feel like a little knock on the head. That's how karma works. See how much you know about karma now even? See how wise you are now? Did you know any of this stuff 3 months ago, 6 months ago, a year ago? See, when you don't know this stuff, you have to go after God. And you have to plead. You have to ask people or other some other divine entity to look after you. Be merciful towards you. Once you understand this stuff, you don't need anyone to be merciful towards you. You can just be merciful towards yourself. You are your own creator. Your karmic energy you create. And that vipaka comes to you. So who's your God? You are your God. Who's your subject? You are your own subject. The whole deal is with you and you alone. Isn't that empowering? Isn't that humbling at the same time? Once you understand this, would you ever raise your voice against someone, hurt someone, harm someone, take something that doesn't belong to you from someone, take a life, take someone else's wife? Would you ever do something like that? Because you know what you do, you will have to suffer. See, this is very humbling, ladies and gentlemen. Just to understand the principle of cause and effect and its application in karma. This is why the Buddha starts off by saying, what the Buddha Sasana is, sabba papa sakaranam. Because if you do papa, if you do sins, it's only you who will have to pay the price. Because you do the karma, you follow the vipaka follows you. He says that, and, this is why I love him. He says that, and then he says, but there is one way you could. You could be freed from your own bad karmas of the past. I mean, what a teacher. What a savior. Don't you feel that he is the greatest gift to humanity? Just look at what he's offered us on a plate. He's not only said, don't do bad deeds because it will come back to bite you, but he's also said, well, before you met me, you didn't know any of this stuff, so you've done plenty of bad deeds. Now you're probably wondering, scratching your head, how the heck do I free myself from all of that? Don't you worry, there's a way to do that as well. How can you not fall in love with the Buddha? I ask you. How can you not fall in love with the Buddha? Isn't he just the greatest human being who was ever alive? Just to have the compassion to teach us all that. He could have just understood all that and passed away, couldn't he? But no, he had to endure so much resistance. People swore at him. They sent drunken elephants at him. They sent soldiers to attack him. Threatened him, poisoned him. And in the face of all that, he just served his purpose. Because the Buddha came to the world to serve a necessity. The Buddha himself came to the world to serve a necessity. Once that necessity was exhausted, you no longer have a Buddha. See? He never said that he was above nature. He understood nature. He never said he was above nature. All things that apply to nature apply to him the same way it applies to you and I. The only difference between you and I and him was that he understood how it all worked. Now we are trying to work out how and what he understood. That's why I feel, this is such an empowering philosophy. Such an empowering philosophy. Once you understand this stuff, you don't need to go after anymore. You don't have to be someone's servant other than your own. But at the same time, it makes you very humble. You realize now, if you want good to happen to you, there's only one way that can happen. You have to be good. There's no other way Vipaka can come your way. If you want good to come, what must you do first? Be good. If you want to receive, what must you do first? Give. There's no other way to receive than to give. There's no other way, because you are merely coming to fruition of your own karmic energy. My karmic energy cannot save you. Your karmic energy cannot save me. So what happens then? When you're born human, this is your human-related karmic energy. You tap into that, and now that karmic energy starts coming to fruition. From that, chittas are born, one after the other, after the other, after the other. Chittas are born, and this karmic energy is exhausted, as it does. Fair enough? Okay. But remember, this happens in an environment of ignorance for you and I. And as a result of that, karma still keeps on happening. So that energy, we keep on recycling, keep throwing it back into the pool. So incessantly, this just keeps on going on. This is perennial, infinite, an infinite cycle. At the point this becomes an arahant, this ignorance is now eradicated. And you know now then, immediately, the karma generating path of the loop is also eradicated. Therefore, there's no longer a loop. But that doesn't stop this. Because this started while there was ignorance. It's a bit like this. If you have a full tank in your car, you turn the ignition and what happens? The engine starts. When the engine's running, as long as there's fuel in the tank, the engine will keep running. If you want the engine to keep running forever, you have to keep on pumping fuel into the tank. But now that there was fuel in the tank when you started the engine, at what point does the engine stop? Once the fuel's run out. It's the same thing here. It's all started when there was ignorance. You pumped fuel into the tank and you turned on the ignition. Now the vehicle's running. At some point you realize there's no point pumping any more fuel into this tank. There's no point going through in this journey, so I stop. Okay, that stopped, fine, right? No more putting fuel into the tank. That's not to say that the fuel that's already in the tank is drawn out, is drained out. So for as long as the fuel in the tank is there, what's going to happen to your engine? It's going to keep on running. That does not need ignorance. That does not require ignorance. What requires ignorance is to get a bunch of this and start the process off. From there on, it's just down to the environment, which is the fact that your physical form, you are alive. That's it. However, even for an arahant, there's a way that you could stop this. In fact, there are two ways you could do that. You can stop this. One, you can temporarily stop this when an arahant goes into a state called Nirodha Samapatti. An arahant who has trained his mind is able to achieve that state called Nirodha Samapatti, at which point vipakas stop coming to fruition. Don't ask me how to do that, I've not done that, so I don't know how. But there's another way. If they took their own life, which has happened in the past, you might wonder why. There were times when there were severe droughts And there was nothing to eat. There was no water. Rahatan Mahansis who lived at the time realized that they had already done what they came into the world to do, that is to become Arahants. But there were other monks, other novices, other people who needed to survive the drought so that they could live on to practice the Dhamma and attain Arahathood for themselves. Having done what they had wanted to do with their lives, they decided that they no longer needed to live. So they took their own lives. That is something they can do with a determination. Don't underestimate the power of an Arahant. There are many things an Arahant can do that for you and I are mere fantasies. Because it's the mind tamed, the most powerful source of energy in the universe. Once the mind is tamed, there's no saying what it can and cannot do. There's no limit to that power. Limitless power. As long as it's within the confines of nature. So not even the Buddha can go beyond nature. But within the confines of nature, there are so many things that for you and I are mere fantasies. For you and I, it's probably just speculation. Maybe we're even skeptical about those things. But as long as they are possible in nature, the tamed mind can do such, perform miracles. For us, they are miracles. For the Buddha, it's just, twin miracle. You call it miracle? The Buddha asks us. It's not a miracle, says the Buddha. Well, to the Buddha it's not a miracle, but for us it is, because we can't perform such things. Levitation for us might be a miracle, because we can't perform such things. But once you've tamed the mind, it's within the realms of nature. Although we might ask, well, with gravity, how does that work? That's because you and I, we don't understand how that works. That's why. Just because something doesn't meet the eye does not mean it doesn't exist. Just because we don't understand things doesn't mean they can't exist. I mean, look at all this stuff. Did you know about all this stuff until we've talked about it today? So does that mean it didn't exist? It was always there. It's only now we are becoming aware of it. So, this aggregation was to serve the necessity to continue in samsara. Like I said, all aggregations only happen where there's a necessity. This aggregation, this connection of karmic energy to the environment only happened because there was a necessity to continue in samsara. But once that necessity has ceased, through the understanding of the Dhamma, that necessity is no longer there to serve, and therefore the generation of karmic energy stops, and one of these doesn't happen again. As in, as soon as the body breaks, the mind does not tap into more karmic energy to continue that journey in samsara. What is drawn now, like the analogy of fuel being pumped into a tank, what has already been pumped in is going to be consumed, but at the end of that, that's it, done. So when a Rahatan Mahansa passes away, that's it. What's it? That's it. So you'll ask me, what happened to the karmic energy then? So a question here, what happened to the karmic energy? Does it not go after him? Where's the him to go after? There was no him at all in the first place. This was all just a process. There's never a doer, just the done, ladies and gentlemen. That is the very essence of all this. This is not karmic energy coming after someone. It's just karmic energy coming into fruition as seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting and touching. But in those chittas, because of ignorance, this chitta perceives that it is I who's seeing. But actually it's not an I who's seeing. Seeing happens. Like seeing's happening right now. That's what Vipaka does. Seeing happens. But because there's ignorance in your minds right now, when seeing happens, you feel that it is I who's seeing. And when you feel that it is I who's seeing, that I keeps on pumping that karmic energy back into the karmic pool, and then the cycle continues. But when the day arrives where you no longer feel that it is I who's seeing, and it's just seeing that happens as a process, which is through your understanding of the Dhamma, there's no longer a need to sustain the I. and then this whole process ceases. How's that headache now? Well, that's more than what I wanted to talk to you about in one day. So, but one thing led to another. What can I do? Like I said, I don't come with an agenda. One thing led to another, and we're talking about the I, we're talking about the mind, we're talking about perception, we're talking about karmic energy, we're talking about Rahatan Mahanses, we're talking about the four great hills, we're talking about all sorts. Well, it made sense to me. But I think it would have made sense to at least some of you. Most of it would have made sense to some of you. Some of it would have made sense to a few of you. Maybe nothing would have made sense to maybe one or two of you. But once again, that's still okay. Please let me reassure you that the reason that some of this might not have made sense is not because I am super intelligent and you're stupid. It's not like that. I was not born with this information, this knowledge. I learned it from my teachers. If I'd heard this for the first time, I'd be left just like you, scratching my head, wondering what the heck was all that. But I have dedicated my life to this cause, so I practice this, I live this, I breathe this. This is my forte. This is what I do. This is what I learn. This is what I live. This is my speciality. The dhamma, the truth, and how to achieve happiness in life. This is what I do 24/7, every waking hour of the day. By extension, what that means is just give it a little bit more time and it will make sense to you. Don't worry. I'm not some super intelligent human being. I'm just a very average and normal guy. I'm a simpleton. In fact, most of you are probably far more intelligent than I am. This is not rocket science. You just need to go over it a few times and it'll make sense. Don't you worry. If none of this made sense, I just want you to walk away today with one thing. If none of this made sense, forget all this, but please walk away today with one thing. One thing more than just that headache that you have right now. That is, all things are in a meeting. That made sense to everyone, right? All things are in a meeting. And because they're in a meeting, by virtue of that, nothing is written off. Nothing is written off to something. Meaning there are no such things called fixed entities. They're simply in a state where they're in that meeting. And those meetings are driven out of necessities. When those necessities cease, that meeting no longer needs to happen, and therefore that meeting is adjourned. As soon as it's adjourned, what do those elements have the freedom to do now? Get involved in another meeting. That's what they do. This karmic energy is now in a meeting. This is all in a meeting right now. That's why your karmic energy does not come to someone else. It's all in a meeting right now. Because you have a bond to this karmic energy. But once that bond is severed, this is just energy. Just energy. It doesn't even need to be karmic energy from there on. It's your mental force that keeps it as karmic energy. Otherwise it's just energy, folks. Just energy. Not even karmic energy. Even that is not fixed. The fact that this energy is karmic energy is just another meeting. That's all. So once your connection to this severs, then it's just energy that is free. That freed energy, or pure energy as we call it, is just released into the universe. What happens after that? That's a topic for another day. See, curiosity killed the cat. Okay? Perhaps even some of what I've shared with you today is too much for you. Too much because this is more knowledge than something that's going to apply to you in day-to-day life. But the reason I've shared this with you today is because it helps you to, maybe there may be some annoying little problems in the back of your mind, some niggling problems in the back of your mind, it's really bugging you. Right? How does this work? Until I get until I can wrap my head around this, I just can't listen to Swami Nuhansa. He gives me the Dhamma, yes, but these problems in the back of my mind, I just can't get over them. I know that some minds are like that. It's okay. It's like, if there's a mosquito bitten here, until you scratch it, you can't focus on anything. So you just, I'll let you scratch it. Some of this is just to serve that purpose, just to give you a bit of a tickle. But that's all. But don't worry about all this. Anicca dukkha anatta is what you need. And living full and wholesome lives as human beings. The final test of whether any of this have had an effect on you is nothing more than, you know what it is. Are you a better father? Are you a better mother? Are you a better husband? Are you a better wife? Are you a better son? Are you a better daughter? Are you a better teacher? Are you a better colleague? Are you a better boss? Are you a better worker? Are you a better human being? Do the people who live with you enjoy your presence more than they used to before you started to listen to the Dhamma? If the answer is yes, then something's happening with you. If the answer is no, then nothing is happening with you. You might as well do something better with your Sunday mornings. I am not in the job of teaching the Dhamma to people. I'm in the job of creating better human beings. That's what this world needs. Humanity. Good, law-abiding, generous, kind-hearted, soft-spoken human beings. People who actually care about other people. People who can love selflessly. People who can be compassionate and feel another person's pain and their hunger, even before they're expressed in words. That's what we need. We don't need professors in the Dhamma, there is plenty of them. We don't need that. As I always said right at the beginning, this is not an academic approach to the Dhamma. This is a practical approach to the Dhamma, an approach that has to start from your heart, not your brain. Understand a little of this, make a big difference in your heart, you're a winner. I love you to bits. Understand lots of this, and you're still rotten inside, I don't want to know you. That's the kind of person I am, and that's the kind of person I like to be with. The success of these sermons, if someone asks you, hey, what are those Sunday sermons, what do they do? Don't please ever tell them that Swami Nuhansa comes and teaches us the Dhamma. You can say that, but don't stop at that. Tell people, Swami Nuhansa helps us to be a better human being. My wife loves me better. My husband enjoys my presence. My children and I, we get along better. I live a happier life now. I don't worry and stress and strain myself like I used to. I'm more forgiving. I'm more compassionate. I'm more tolerant of people. These are the things that have happened in my life. If they say, I don't want that stuff, I want the Dhamma, then tell them Sunday morning is not where they should be here. Go somewhere else. But if they hear you say that and say, oh really, I would like some of that, bring them along. That's what we are doing here, ladies and gentlemen. That's what we are doing here. This is all a means to that end. Do we have a pact? An MOU? That should be our memorandum of understanding. As long as we have that understanding, I'm happy to teach you all the Dhamma in the world and at least everything I know. Provided that you use it to serve mankind. What is the greatest service to God? Service to your fellow human being. Service to your fellow man. That is the greatest service to God. And you can make sense of it through this as well. See, service to God is when you do good to another person. And what does God do after that? He serves you well. Karma and vipaka. See? So in whichever lens you look at it, You can either talk about it through God, or you can talk about it through karma and vipaka. It's the same story. Just a different interpretation. Some say God, others talk about karma and vipaka. The reason that this is more empowering is you know that you don't have to please anyone. There's no one to whom you have to be a servant besides your own self. Do good to yourself by doing good to others. Do harm to yourself by doing harm to others. Simple philosophy in life to live by. What's that again? Do good to yourself by doing good to others. Do harm to yourself by doing harm to others. A simple philosophy of life to live by. Simple as that. Right, I think I should do good to you right now by concluding this and setting you off on your way home. Right, let's do the merit transfer and bring the sermon to a close. Can I also remind you, everyone, that on the 31st at the monastery, we'd be very happy to have you all. Should you like to visit us, or should you be available? Every 31st we have the Met Shanti Karma. So we all get together and we chant the Arya Maitreya. We contemplate, it's not just a mantra that we chant, we contemplate on metta. If you had a chance to listen to yesterday's talk at the monastery, the one that we did in Sinhalese, you will understand why a Met Shanti Karma is so powerful and how it helps you on your path to Nibbāna. So, unfortunately, that's not what we talked about today, but we'll talk about it another day in case it comes up. But if you can and have the time, and if you want to come along with your family, then please do. The event starts at 5 on the 31st. From 5 to 7, we'll have a sermon, a dhamma talk, where we'll explain to you exactly what you're going to be doing during the Met Shanti Karma. And at 7 we'll stop so you can have a meal. So all that is, please don't bring your packed lunch. We'll have it ready for you at the monastery. And then at 8 we start the evening off, and typically Guru Swami Mahanse talks to us all at the launch of the new year, which is something we all look forward to, and gives us sets us the vision and the agenda for the new year for us. So, and then it will go on till the following morning, of course. So the following morning we have a dakineyo. Every first of the year there's a dakineyo, alms offering. So that's a wonderful way to spend the beginning of the year, by doing lots of merits, because you see, after all, it's your merits that come back to you. No one else is there to save you. Only your own merits that you do for yourself. But in the same vein, if your family expects you to be at home and other engagements, you must not forget that as well, because not everyone will be parallel to you on your path to Nibbāna. Some might want you to be at home, so please don't hurt others' feelings by completely disregarding their interests. You must be sensitive to their wants and needs as well, because you're in a relationship with people, so they expect you to fulfill some of those expectations at least, and that is also part of our duty to do that. But if you can, bring them along. If you are available, please come along. We'll be very happy to have you all. So that's on the 31st as we launch ourselves into the new year. Okay? All right. Let's do the merit transfer and bring today's sermon to a close. Let us all take a moment then to transfer the merits that we have all acquired by listening to the Dhamma, inviting the Swami Master to deliver the sermon, creating a conducive environment for all to come along and practice the path, as well as making offerings to the Noble Triple Gem. First and foremost, let us take this opportunity to transfer all the merits that we have acquired to the bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, upasakas and upasikas who have since time immemorial protected and preserved the sublime teachings of the Buddha and passed it down through the generations of the noble lineage in the form of the Tripitaka, which is thankfully available to us today to study, understand and comprehend the Dhamma. Let us take a moment to transfer these merits To the monks and nuns resident in your local temples and nunneries, to the Mahanayakatheras, the Ananayakatheras of all the chapters. Let us also transfer this message to my teacher Guru Swami Nuhanse, as well as all the monks resident at the monastery, and the Anagarikas and the Anagarikas attached to the monastery. Let us also take a moment to transfer this message to those who make great efforts to disseminate the teachings of the Buddha, be that by transliterating these talks, sharing them out with others, or inviting others to join them. May they all rejoice in these merits. Let us also take a moment to transfer this message to our devotees and friends of the monastery, who for the sake of their own merits, to help them attain the supreme bliss of Nibbāna, continue to sustain the Mahasangha. This includes all of you who provide the Mahasangha with shelter, alms, robes and medicines, as well as pass on your know-how and continue to extend their well wishes. May they all rejoice in these merits, and by the power of these merits may they be healed of any physical and mental ailments and overcome any obstacles to their spiritual progress. May they abstain from the unmeritorious deeds, fulfill the meritorious deeds, fulfill the Noble Eightfold Path, and may they all attain the supreme bliss of Nibbāna. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Let us also take a moment to transfer this message to our mothers and fathers, brothers and sisters, sons and daughters, grandparents, uncles, aunts, cousins, nephews and nieces, our friends, our acquaintances, our employers and our employees, as well as our teachers, and anyone and everyone who have helped us, supported us, and assisted us in any way, shape or form possible and available to them. May they all rejoice in these merits, and by the power of these merits may they also be freed of any physical and mental ailments and overcoming obstacles to their spiritual progress. May they abstain from the unmeritorious deeds, fulfill the meritorious deeds, fulfill the Noble Eightfold Path, and may they all attain the supreme bliss of Nibbāna. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Let us also take a moment to transfer this message to the Devas and Brahmas, spirits and demons, primarily the Sakadeva, as well as all the numerous gods and deities who have committed themselves to protecting the Sambuddhasasana. Let us also transfer this message to the members of the armed forces, the police force, as well as those who lost their lives in your name, your fathers, your ancestors, your ancestors, your forefathers, and anyone and everyone who's been a relation of yours in this long journey of samsara. May they all rejoice in these merits. Let us also take a moment to transfer these merits to those who lost their lives in the wars, be they friend or foe, as well as in natural disasters such as the tsunamis and earthquakes, landslides, fires, floods, pandemics, and so on. Reminding ourselves that in this infinitely long journey of samsara, they will all have been mothers and fathers to you, brothers and sisters to you, friends to you, supported you, assisted you, and helped you in any way possible. With an abundance of loving kindness and compassion towards all of them, let us transfer all the merits we have acquired to all, and may by the power of these merits, if any of them have been born in the woeful planes, they redeem themselves and be born in the blissful plane. May they abstain from the unmeritorious deeds, fulfill the meritorious deeds, fulfill the Noble Eightfold Path, and may they all attain the supreme bliss of Nibbāna. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And finally, may by the power and blessings of all the merits we have acquired throughout the day, we be able to witness the advent of many hundreds of thousands of arahants on this blessed land. And finally, may you and I, and everyone who's helped make this program a success, become a Rahatan Nuhanse or Arahat Terani Nuhanse in this life itself and in the era of this Sambuddhasasana itself. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. May the blessings of the Noble Triple Gem be with you all. The members of the Mahasangha will now transfer their blessings to you. Rajagiriya nidatva dveshagiriya nidatva mohagiriya nidatva Nibbāna parama sukhayan Sukhita taravetva Nibbāna parama sukhayan Sukhita taravetva Mamada siyalu loka siyalu satvayo Nibbāna parama sukhayan Sukhita taravetva Nibbāna parama sukhayan Sukhita taravetva Nibbāna parama sukhayan Sukhita taravetva Rajagini niveva, dveshagini niveva, mohagini niveva, nivan sapa labeva, nivan sapa labeva, nivan sapa labeva. තුන්රුවන්ගේ සූවිසි අනන්ත මහා ගුණ බලෙන් සියලු ලෝක සියලු සත්වයෝම නිබ්බාන පරම සුඛයෙන් සුඛතර වෙත්වා. සාදු සාදු සාදු.